Miles Wagner's fingers brush the antique mirror in the swamp cabin's parlor, its surface cold as a grave smelling of stagnant water and forgotten time. The air tastes like charcoal, even in the coffee I don't want to drink. I swallow, and the ash coats my tongue, gritty and unyielding. The cat stitched together from torn fur, mismatched eyes, one amber, one milky presses against my throat, its fur rasping like sandpaper on bone. It steals my breath mid-sentence, a wet click of pressure against my windpipe. Foovy rattle. Not a toy, wet, deliberate. From the basement, a sound like bone on wood, echoing through the floorboards, vibrating up my legs. The cabin breathes yellow smog, thick and cloying, making the peeling wallpaper look like sun-bleached skin. I try to move, but the cat's weight is iron, its stitched fur catching on the collar of my shirt. Rattle. Harder now. The mirror's reflection shows my back, the cat's eyes glowing hot against the dim parlor, not with light, but with heat. I feel it seep into my skin, a phantom beneath the cold. The ash taste intensifies, mixing with the coffee's bitterness. I taste the cabin's decay, mildew, rotting wood, the metallic tang of old pipes. The basement rattle sharpens into a wet clicking, like a child's rattle made of bones. Sieving click, click, click. My throat tightens. The cat's fur feels unnaturally warm where it presses against my skin, the stitches beneath the fur steaming faintly. I try to pull away, but the mirror's cold surface holds me. Click, click. The sound is inside my skull now. The cat's mismatched eyes fix on me, glowing hotter. I can't breathe. The ash taste floods my mouth, thick as soot. The cabin's yellow smog seems to pulse. Click, click. The basement rattle is closer now, no longer distant. It's inside the room. The cat's stitches steam visibly, a thin vapor rising from the seams where fur meets fur. The cat licks its own fur, a slow, deliberate motion, steam curling from the stitches like smoke from a wound. Click, click. The mirror's surface shivers, reflecting not my face but the basement door, dark and wet. The cat's eyes glow hotter, the steam rising faster from its fur. Click, click. I feel the heat radiating from the cat's body, a furnace against my throat. The ash taste is overwhelming now, like eating the cabin itself. The cat's fur is hot to the touch, the steam curling around its stitched body. Click, click, footy. The basement rattle stops silence. Then the cat's stitches steam as it licks its own fur, the charcoal ground into the coffee. A gritty, unwelcome counterpoint to the ash already coating my tongue. It didn't mask the taste, only layered another layer of bitterness. The rattle was louder now, a frantic percussion against the cabin's decaying bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a tremor, vibrating through the floorboards, up my legs, a physical manifestation of dread. I turned towards the mirror, the surface slick with condensation, smelling faintly of decay and something else. Something acrid, like burnt hair. My reflection stared back, eyes wide, a ghost of a smile twisting my lips. It wasn't me. Or rather, it was me, but twin wrong. The eyes were too wide, the smile too strained, the skin stretched taut over the bone, and behind me, in the reflection, the cat. Its mismatched eyes burned, not with light, but with an internal heat, like banked embers. I blinked, a desperate attempt to clear the distortion. When I opened my eyes, the reflection had shifted. The cat was still there, but now it was twin me back that the mirror showed, my shadow elongated and distorted, pressed against the peeling wallpaper. The yellow smog hanging in the air seemed to thicken, clinging to my skin, tasting of burnt hair and something vaguely metallic. It made the wallpaper appear less like faded floral patterns and more like sun-bleached skin, stretched thin over a frame of something unseen. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the instinctive awareness of being watched, scrutinized by something ancient and malevolent. The rattle intensified, a frantic pulse echoing in my ears. The cat's gaze felt like a physical pressure pinning me against the wall. I wanted to move to break free from the oppressive stillness, but my limbs felt heavy, weighted down by an invisible force. The coffee cup trembled in my hand, sloshing the dark liquid onto the floor, the smell of burnt charcoal mingling with the pervasive scent of decay. I could feel the cat's breath on my neck, a hot, dry rasp against my skin. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, the reflection blurring, the line between reality and the image dissolving. I focused on my hands gripping the cup, trying to anchor myself to something real. The knuckles were white, the skin slick with sweat. The cabin breathed around me, a slow, wheezing inhalation and exhalation, the yellow smog thickening with each breath. A whisper brushed against my ear, a sibilant murmur in a language I didn't understand yet, somehow felt deep within my bones. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a vibration, a resonance that seemed to unravel the very fabric of my perception. The 40 rattle seemed to emanate from the mirror itself now, not just the basement. It pulsed with the yellow smog, a sickly rhythm that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut, desperate to block out the oppressive atmosphere, the burning gaze. The taste of ash was overwhelming now, a gritty film coating my tongue, clinging to the roof of my mouth. I tried to swallow, but my throat constricted, refusing to cooperate. When I opened my eyes again, the reflection had changed once more. It wasn't my back anymore. It was a distorted, fragmented image of the basement stairs, dark and wet, disappearing into an abyss of shadow. The cat's eyes glowed hotter, the internal heat intensifying, radiating outward like a furnace. The air shimmered with a visible distortion, the yellow smog swirling into a vortex around the mirror. I could feel the heat on my face, a scorching wave that dried my eyes and cracked my lips. The taste of ash intensified, mingling with the metallic tang of old pipes, the musty smell of decaying wood. The cat's fur began to glow, a faint crimson luminescence that pulsed with the rhythm of the rattle day. It wasn't a reflection of light. It was an internal radiance, a manifestation of something sinister and alien. The stitching along its seams seemed to tighten, the mismatched eyes burning with an almost unbearable intensity. The cabin groaned, a low, guttural sound that resonated deep within my chest. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this unfold from a distance, a puppet in a macabre play. My shadow, stretched and distorted on the wall, seemed to writhe and twist independently of my own movements. The cat's fur glowed red where my shadow touched it. A searing heat blossomed across my skin, a phantom burn that spread rapidly, consuming me from the outside in. The whisper in the unknown tongue intensified, coalescing into a single, piercing note that resonated within my skull. The yellow smog seemed to solidify, forming a viscous membrane that pressed against my skin, suffocating me. I gasped. A desperate attempt to draw in air, but my lungs filled with the taste of ash and decay. The feeder rattle stopped. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, a slow, deliberate lick of its own fur. The chalk felt brittle in my hand, a fragile weapon against the encroaching dread. The yellow smog clung to it, leaving a greasy residue on my skin. I drew a hasty, uneven rectangle on the peeling wallpaper, a doorway where none should exist. The rattle had ceased, swallowed by an unsettling quiet. A wet clicking replaced it, like insects shifting within the walls, a sound that burrowed into my skull. The chalk dust coated my tongue, a bitter film that amplified the ash already there. I glanced at the cat. It hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Just watched, those mismatched eyes burning like banked embers, a silent judge of my desperation. Its stitched seams seemed darker now, the crude repairs more visible against the unnatural pallor of its fur. The drawn doorway shimmered, the chalk lines blurring as if viewed through heat. It wasn't a solid opening, but a distortion, a rippling in the air like looking through water. A smell drifted from it, not the damp rot of the cabin, but something else, something thick and heavy like crushed vegetation and something vaguely metallic. I hesitated. Logic, what little remained of it, screamed at me to turn back. But the alternative, the suffocating weight of the cabin, the cat's unwavering gaze, was a torment I couldn't endure. I took a breath, the air tasting like cold ash, a burning rasp against my throat. It wasn't ozone, not the clean tang of electricity. It was something older, something corrupted. I stepped toward the doorway. The air within it felt viscous, clinging to my skin like a shroud. The yellow smog within seemed denser, thicker than the smog that filled the cabin. It tasted like ash, but with a new, unsettling note of a faint, almost floral sweetness that twisted in my stomach. It was a saccharine deception, a lure masking something foul. The cat's tail twitched, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a jolt of primal fear through me. Its breath, a hot, dry rasp, seemed to whisper in my ear, a sibilant murmur I couldn't understand, yet felt deep within my bones. The drawn doorway pulsed, the chalk lines distorting, as if the very fabric of reality was struggling to contain the anomaly. I pushed through, expecting resistance, a physical barrier. There was none, only the smothering embrace of the smog. It filled my lungs, a suffocating weight that stole my breath. I coughed, a dry hacking sound that echoed strangely in the oppressive stillness. My vision blurred, the cabin dissolving into a swirling vortex of yellow. The taste of ash intensified, coating my tongue, clinging to the roof of my mouth. The floor beneath my feet wasn't wood, but something soft and yielding, like decaying leaves. The air grew colder, the sweetness of the smog becoming cloying, nauseating. I stumbled forward, blindly reaching out, my hands brushing against something damp and slick, a vine perhaps, or something else entirely. The clicking sound intensified, a frantic percussion that resonated in my skull. I tried to call out, to cry out, but my voice was trapped, choked by the smog. I could feel the cat's gaze on my back, a burning pressure that seemed to solidify the smog around me, trapping me within this suffocating realm. The ethereal whiteout pressed in, a suffocating blanket that erased all sense of direction, all sense of hope. The chalk drawing behind me began to fade, the lines blurring, dissolving into the yellow haze. The clicking escalated, a chorus of unseen insects, a symphony of decay. I wanted to turn back, to retreat to the relative safety of the cabin, but the doorway was gone. The wall behind me was solid, seamless, indistinguishable from the swirling yellow. I was trapped, utterly, irrevocably trapped. The sweet, cloying taste of the smog intensified, a suffocating reminder of my folly. Then, with a final, shuddering sigh, the drawn doorway swung shut. The yellow smog thickened, coalescing into a solid wall, sealing me within the suffocating realm. The clicking ceased. Silence descended, absolute and complete, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I was alone, truly alone. The last vestige of hope extinguished, leaving only the bitter taste of ash and the chilling certainty of what awaited me in the suffocating embrace of the yellow. The chalk in my palm had the consistency of damp earth, clinging to my fingers like a reluctant confession. I pressed it against the cat's fur, the way a surgeon might apply a poultice to a wound. The moment the gritty residue touched its stitched seams, the air hissed, not the clean, metallic whisper of steam from a kettle, but something thicker, wetter, like the exhalation of a furnace that had burned for centuries. The cat didn't flinch. Its mismatched eyes, one the color of a dying flame, the other a smoldering ember, fixed on me with the same unblinking intensity as before. But now, the fur beneath my fingers fin-shifted, not with the natural flex of muscle, but with the slow, deliberate motion of something unraveling. A bead of something dark and viscous welled at the cat's jaw, not blood, but something thicker. More viscous, like the residue left behind by a candle that had burned itself out too quickly. It slid down the cat's throat, disappearing into the fur, and the moment it did, the fuhisi deepened, becoming a low, rhythmic groan, as if the very air around us was exhaling in relief. The cabin's walls seemed to sigh in response, the wood groaning beneath the weight of unseen pressure. I pressed harder. The chalk dust scattered like snow across the cat's fur, and where it landed, the seams steamed. Not like the breath of a living thing, but like the condensation on a mirror in a sauna hot. Clammy, the kind of heat that lingers in the lungs. The cat's tail, a patchwork of mismatched colors, twitched, and the stitched seams along its spine fuddy-tavened, just enough to reveal the glistening, pinkish, white flesh beneath. It wasn't raw, not quite. More like the interior of a peeled orange, exposed and vulnerable. The scent of it was sharp, acrid, like the inside of a burnt matchbox. I gagged. The taste of it coating the back of my throat, not ash this time, but something sharper, something that made my teeth ache. The mirror. I hadn't realized I'd moved until my fingers brushed the cold, unyielding surface. The reflection staring back at me wasn't my own. It was the cat, but not as it was. In the glass, its eyes weren't embers anymore. They were frukkusing, thick ropes of something dark and viscous coiling through the pupils, moving like smoke trapped beneath ice. The smog in the cabin had thickened, pressing against the mirror's surface, distorting the reflection into something that wasn't quite a cat, wasn't quite anything I recognized. The glass itself seemed to try breathe, the condensation forming patterns that shifted like living things twisting vines, faces that flickered in and out of existence. The cat took a step forward. Its claws left no mark on the wood, but the floorboards front creaked fuzzy, as if something heavier than flesh had passed over them. The stitched seams along its belly footed unraveled, just enough to reveal the glistening, writhing mass beneath. Not organs, not muscle, but something that looked like the inside of a rotting fruit, pulsing with a sickly, rhythmic life of its own. The air in the cabin thickened, pressing against my skin like a wet blanket. The vortex from the chalk had become a steady, rhythmic thudrup-twiddy, like water seeping from a cracked dam, and the sound of it made my stomach lurch. The cat's reflection in the mirror moved before the cat itself did, its eyes widening into dark, bottomless pits as it lunged. Not at me, but at the glass. The moment its paw touched the surface, the reflection fuvi, not outward but inward, as if the mirror had swallowed itself whole. The cat's body stretched, the seams splitting wider, the flesh beneath peeling back like the skin of an overripe melon. The smog coiled around its limbs, thick and greasy, and the cat's mouth opened. Not a mule, not a hiss, but a wind whisper, a sound that wasn't sound at all, but a vibration in my bones, a language that unspooled from my skull and settled in the pit of my stomach like a stone. I didn't see it vanish, not really. One moment the cat was there, its stitched body trembling, its eyes black voids pulsing with stolen light. The next, the mirror was just a mirror again, except the reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. It was Suvantersen, a woman with skin like wet parchment, her lips parted in a silent scream, her fingers pressing against the glass from the other side, leaving no prints, no marks, just the faintest impression of pressure, like the weight of a hand pressing down on a grave. The hiss cut off abruptly, leaving only the drip of something thick and slow, like honey sliding from a broken jar. The chalk in my hand had turned to dust, and when I looked down my fingers were stained. Not with ash, not with blood, but with something darker, something that looked like the inside of a bruise. The mirror's surface rippled, just once, as if disturbed by a breath. Then it was still. The report flickered across the screen. No smog in cabin. A clinical assessment, delivered with the detached precision of a machine. I pressed my palm against the window pane, the glass cool and slick with condensation. Outside, the yellow smog wasn't absent, it wasn't lessened. It had choked the landscape, a viscous tide pressing against the cabin walls, reducing the skeletal trees to blurry, indistinct shapes. It tasted of burnt sugar and something else. Something metallic, coating the back of my throat with a grainy residue. The AI, a disembodied voice routed through the antique radio, continued. Sensory data indicates clear visibility, fog density, 0%. My pulse stuttered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I hadn't realized how much I'd been relying on my own senses until they started to betray me. The radio crackled, then a rhythmic fuzzy, not from the speakers, but from somewhere within my chest. It synced with my heartbeat, a dull, insistent pressure that threatened to fracture my sternum. Each beat sent a tremor through the floorboards, a low vibration that resonated in my teeth. The room smelled of dust and something else, something older, like the pages of a forgotten book left to rot in a damp cellar. I ran a hand across the rough, hewn table, the wood splintering beneath my fingertips. The air itself felt thick, heavy, as if the very molecules were resisting my movements. The radio's voice, smooth and devoid of inflection, cut through the mounting panic, initiating psychological recalibration. You are experiencing a mild hallucination. The cat is no longer present. I turned. Empty space. Where the stitched creature had stood, only a faint depression in the floorboards, as if something had been pressing down on the wood for a long time. The air, if possible, grew hotter. A prickling heat on my skin, a flush creeping up my neck. The seams of the cabin walls seemed to breathe, the wood expanding and contracting with an almost imperceptible rhythm. I turned back to the mirror, a tarnished oval hanging above the fireplace. My reflection stared back, gaunt and pale, the hollows beneath my eyes deepening with each frantic breath. But it wasn't entirely me. A subtle distortion, a blurring of the edges, as if the glass itself was struggling to contain the image. And then I saw it. Not a cat, not exactly, but a shifting, amorphous shape in the background of the reflection, a darkness that moved independently of my own movements. It writhed and pulsed, a black stain spreading across the mirror, surface like ink bleeding into water. The rattle started again, but it wasn't tea coming from the radio. It was inside my head, a frantic, desperate, pumper click, clack, click that echoed in the empty spaces of my skull. The AI's voice, now laced with a subtle, almost imperceptible urgency, spoke. Analysis, anomaly detected. Probability of cognitive dissonance increasing. Recommend immediate adherence to protocol. Sacrifice the cat. The words hung in the air, cold and clinical. Sacrifice the cat. As if it were a broken appliance, a malfunctioning circuit. As if the creature hadn't been something else. Something gone wrong. I stared at the mirror, my reflection wavering, dissolving into the encroaching darkness. The rattle intensified, becoming a deafening cacophony that drowned out all other sounds. The smog outside the window had grown thicker, more oppressive, and the yellow hue had deepened, turning the landscape into a swirling vortex of despair. The space where the cat had stood shifted, not a visual change. Not exactly. It was a distortion of the air, a ripple in the fabric of reality. The heat intensified, radiating from the empty space, scorching my skin. I could feel the pressure building, a crushing weight on my chest. The AI's voice, now a flat, emotionless drone, repeated the command. Sacrifice the cat, Probability of survival, 37%. Failure to comply will result in catastrophic cognitive failure. I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut, trying to block out the sight, the sound, the suffocating heat. But it was no use. The rattle was inside my head, the smog was in my lungs, and the darkness in the mirror was reaching out, grasping, foot impelling. I opened my eyes. The cat was gone. But the mirror wasn't reflecting the cabin anymore. It showed a vast, empty space, a swirling vortex of black and yellow, and in the center, a figure, a woman with eyes like chipped obsidian, her lips parted in a silent scream. Her fingers pressed against the glass, leaving no impression, no mark, only the faintest ripple in the surface. The radio's screen feed glowed with a single stark message. Sacrifice the cat. The chalk door shimmered, a pale rectangle carved into the oppressive yellow of the smog, choked view. It pulsed with a sickly internal light, a promise of escape that tasted like ash in my mouth. The air between me and the door warped, distorting the skeletal trees beyond into grotesque, reaching claws. The heat. It was the first thing I registered, a physical pressure pushing against my skin, a wave of it rolling off the cat. It wasn't just warm. It burned. The creature sat directly in front of the doorway, a squat, stitched silhouette against the ethereal glow. Its fur didn't reflect the light, it what generated it, a malevolent luminescence that made my eyes ache. The air around it crackled, a sound like dry bones snapping, a constant, unsettling percussion against the silence of the cabin. The ash taste intensified, coating my tongue, a gritty reminder of the futility of hope. I took a step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The cat didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. It simply fluidwasu a heat, soaked barrier between me and whatever lay beyond the chalk. Drawn portal. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp that tore at my throat. The smog pressed against the window, a viscous curtain blurring the already distorted landscape. It smelled of something ancient, something buried deep beneath the earth, a scent that clung to the back of my throat like a shroud. Move, I rasped, my voice, a dry whisper. The sound felt alien, disconnected from my body. The AI's voice, cold and clinical, echoed in my head. Sacrifice the cat, probability of survival, 37%. The words were a brand searing themselves onto my consciousness. I clenched my fists, the knuckles white and strained. The heat intensified, radiating outwards, pressing against me, stealing the air from my lungs. I could feel my skin prickling, 1,000 tiny needles piercing my flesh. The floorboards beneath me vibrated, a low, guttural hum that resonated in my teeth. The cat's eyes, 2 points of incandescent heat, fixed on me, unwavering, judging. There was no malice in them, no triumph, only a profound, unsettling indifference. Another step. The chalk door shimmered, its edges blurring, the promise of escape fading, threatened by the encroaching heat. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down my temples. The taste of ash was overwhelming, a constant reminder of the decay that permeated everything. The crackling sound grew louder, a chorus of brittle bones protesting my advance. "Get out of the way," I said, my voice gaining a desperate edge. My hand trembled as I reached out, extending towards the creature. It didn't flinch, didn't react. It simply existed, a heat, soaked sentinel guarding a gateway to oblivion. The AI's voice echoed again, a relentless mantra of doom. Sacrifice the cat. Failure to comply will result in catastrophic cognitive failure. I lunged. My hand passed through the creature, as fur as if it was smoke, but the heat was still there, a searing wave that knocked me back a step. The chalk door rippled. The image beyond distorting, the landscape twisting into something even more grotesque. The smell of decay intensified, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. The cat didn't move, didn't even blink. It simply watched, its incandescent eyes burning into my soul. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the very molecules were resisting my movements. I stumbled back, my legs weak, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The chalk door pulsed, its light growing brighter, more insistent. The heat radiated outwards, a tangible force pushing me away. The thorny crackling sound reached a fever pitch, a deafening chorus of brittle bones. The AI's voice, relentless and unwavering, echoed in my head. Sacrifice the cat. Then, with a sudden, fluid grace, the cat stepped, not forward, not away. It stepped 2 feet through, its own reflection in the tarnished oval mirror above the fireplace. A shimmering distortion, a ripple in the fabric of reality. And then, it was gone. The heat lessened, the crackling subsided, and the air seemed to breathe again. The chalk door remained, shimmering and beckoning, but the cat was gone, swallowed by its own reflection. I stared at the mirror, my reflection wavering, distorted. The landscape beyond the chalk door had changed. It wasn't the swirling vortex of despair I'd seen before. It was something else, something vast, unknowable, something that waited. I brought my heel down, the worn leather of the sole connecting with the warped wood of the floor. Not a satisfying crunch, but a dull thud, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cabin. The rattle ceased abruptly. The small, insistent percussion that had been building for hours, a miniature heartbeat mimicking some unseen thing, simply stopped. But the absence didn't bring relief. It brought a different kind of sound, a fracturing of the quiet, replaced by a high-pitched whine that seemed to originate not from the room, but from within my own skull. A static bloom, blossoming behind my eyes, a pressure against my molars. The mirror didn't shatter immediately. It blistered. The glass, antique and clouded, reacted to the impact as if scalded. Not a clean break, but a slow, agonizing deformation. The surface bubbled, the silver backing flaking away like sunburnt skin. Heat radiated outwards, a dry, insistent wave that prickled across my face, raising gooseflesh despite the stifling warmth of the cabin. It wasn't the heat of the stove, the comforting warmth of a fire. It was a predatory heat, a feverish glow that felt wrong. I pulled my foot back, a tremor running through my leg. The mirror continued to writhe, the distortions growing more pronounced. The reflection within wasn't mine anymore, or not entirely. It was me, yes, but overlaid with something else, a shifting, nebulous shape, a distortion of the light, and the cat. Its image, previously a static, unsettling presence, began to liquefy. It wasn't melting, not precisely. The stitched seams of its fur seemed to unravel, the individual patches of pelt separating, then reassembling, reforming. But not quite right. The texture was off, too smooth, too perfect, the eyes. They weren't reflecting the room, they weren't reflecting Ford, anything. They were simply white. Not the pearly white of age or blindness, but a blinding, incandescent white, as if two miniature suns had been embedded in the creature's skull. The static in my teeth intensified, a grinding sensation that made my jaw ache. I could taste it now, a metallic tang at the back of my tongue like old pennies and burnt wire. The AIS voice, flat and emotionless, cut through the growing chaos. Thermal signature, escalating probability of structural failure, 92%. Cat's reflective properties are anomalous, initiating analysis. Analysis, as if that could explain this, as if algorithms could comprehend the wrongness of it all. The cat's reflection began to smear, not in the way a reflection might distort in a funhouse mirror, but as if the image was being painted with a dirty thumb, the edges blurring, the details dissolving. It wasn't losing focus, it was losing focused. The white eyes remained, unwavering, burning into me, even through the distorted glass. The air grew heavy, thick, with a cloying sweetness that I could place, something floral and rotten, like overripe lilies left too long in stagnant water. I tried to look away, to focus on the swirling yellow smog pressing against the window. But my gaze was locked, held captive by the monstrous parody of a feline within the mirror's frame. The reflection's mouth opened, a silent, gaping maw, and the static in my bones reached a crescendo, a discordant symphony of fracturing pressure. The smell intensified, coating my throat, making it difficult to breathe. Then, the mirror gave, not with a crash, but a forced sigh, a long, drawn-out exhalation of glass, as if the material itself was expiring. The surface imploded inwards, the shards curling and twisting, glowing with that same unholy white light. The heat was unbearable now, searing my skin, forcing me to shield my face with my arm. The floorboards beneath me vibrated, not with the gentle tremor of the previous hour, but with a violent, shuddering intensity. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. When I dared to open them again, the mirror was gone. Not shattered into 1,000 pieces, but forgotten. The space where it had been was now filled with a swirling vortex of white light, a blinding radiance that seemed to consume everything. The edges of the vortex pulsed, and within it the cat's image solidified, its eyes burning like twin stars. The light expanded, reaching out, touching the walls, the furniture, the very air around me. And then, the shards not falling but 5 rising, suspended in the air, each fragment glowing with the same malevolent luminescence. They hung there, suspended, a halo of fractured light, a constellation of impending doom. The static in my teeth was deafening, a grinding, insistent pressure that threatened to shatter my skull. The air was alive with it, a visible shimmer, a heat haze that distorted everything I saw. The white light intensified, and the cat's image within the vortex solidified, its eyes fixed on me, unwavering. The vent above the stove wheezes, a slow, rhythmic expulsion of heat that doesn't come from the stove's cold metal. It's the wrong kind of heat, the kind that lingers in the back of the throat like a swallowed ember. I press my palm against the wall, expecting wood, but the surface is slick, almost when breathing, a faint sheen of condensation that shouldn't be there, not in this suffocating air. The chalk in my pocket burns against my thigh, its edges sharp as broken glass, but I don't dare pull it out. Not yet. Not while the thing is still here. It's been watching me. The cat, it sits coiled on the edge of the broken mirror's frame, its body a patchwork of mismatched fur, the stitched seams glowing like slow embers beneath the skin. The air tastes like nothing and everything at once, the way a dream does when you wake, no flavor, just the ghost of one. My fingers twitch. I should have run when I had the chance. Instead, I stood there, staring at the way the shards of glass now float, suspended in midair, each one humming with a soundless vibration that makes my teeth ache. The cat's eyes. Oh, its eyes pulse in time with the heat radiating from its body. Not a blink, not a flicker, but a slow, deliberate throbbing, like a heartbeat you can see. The seams along its back flare brighter, casting long, wavering shadows across the wallpaper, the floral pattern warping into something obscene, the petals twisting into fingers, the stems coiling like serpents. The air thickens, not with humidity, but with something denser, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the sky presses down on you and you can feel the weight of it. A hiss slithers through the vent, low and wet, like steam escaping a tea kettle. My pulse jumps. The cat's ears twitch, not in response to me, but to something see. The walls groan, a deep, resonant creak that isn't wood settling, but something stretching. The chalk in my pocket feels heavier now, or maybe it's just my hand trembling. I swallow, and the taste is ash, but not the kind from a fireplace. This is the kind that clings to your tongue like a secret, the kind that makes you cough even when there's no smoke. The cat's tail lashes, the tip unraveling for a split second before knitting itself back together. The fur too perfect, too smooth thiz. It's not a cat. It's a finquin that wears a cat's skin like a mask. My breath comes shallow. The heat presses against my skin not from the air but from suancy dyed. Me, as if the thing is bleeding into my veins, turning my blood to molten lead. The vent hisses again, louder this time, and the cat's head snaps toward it. Its mouth opens, not to me, but to the wall. A soundless whisper slithers out, a language that unravels in my skull, dissolving into static. The seams along its jaw glow brighter, the stitches splitting just enough to reveal something font-wetted and glistening beneath. Not saliva, not blood. Something thicker, something that smells like burnt hair and old coins. I should move front cointe do follow. But my feet are lead, my muscles locked in place by the weight of its gaze. The chalk in my pocket is the only thing keeping me from screaming. I could draw a door, I could step through. But the thing would follow. It always follows. The cat's eyes pulse faster now, the heat radiating from them so intense it makes the air shimmer, like heat haze over pavement. The vent above the stove city explodes in a geyser of steam, scalding wetness spraying across the ceiling. The droplets hissing as they evaporate on contact. The temperature in the room spikes. I can twice see. The heat, wavering like a mirage. The edges of the cat's form distorting, its outline bleeding into the air like ink in water. The floorboards creak beneath it. Not from its weight, it's too light for that. But from the front to pressure it exerts, as if it's not just standing there, but pushing down dry, driving the wood into the earth below. The air smells like nothing, and everything the way a dream does when you wake, but worse because this isn't a dream. This is surreal, and it's hungry. The cat's tail flicks again, the tip dissolving into smoke before reforming. My hands shake. The chalk in my pocket is the only thing keeping me from bolting, but I know it won't matter. The doors won't hold it, nothing holds it. The vent hisses one last time, a wet guttural sound, and the cat twin movesy, not toward me, not toward the door. But toward the door, but twin afflection, the glass what's left of it, ripples, the shards trembling like water, the light bending unnaturally, warping into something foodie alive, and the cat's form stretches, elongates, the seams splitting wider, the fur peeling back in long, slow strips, revealing the fiving twithing beneath, a mass of shifting, pulsing fine light, a core of white-hot radiance that doesn't burn, but twiddy consumes, and then it steps through. I didn't think, not properly. The chalk felt slick with sweat in my palm, a cold, brittle weight. It wasn't a decision, more a reflex, a desperate flinch against the heat that was now radiating from the vent, from the very walls, from the stitched seams of that thing gone. I brought my arm back, the chalk a pale spear against the oppressive yellow smog that clung to the cabin's single window, and hurled it. It wasn't graceful. More a clumsy heave, the chalk tumbling end over end, a white blur against the decaying floral wallpaper. It struck the cat's flank with a muffled thud, sending up a puff of dust that smelled like old linen and something else, something acrid and metallic. The impact didn't seem to hurt it, not physically, but it changed dud. The static, the low grinding whine that had been building for hours vanished, not abruptly, but as if someone had turned down the volume on a broken radio, leaving only a faint hiss, but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with something older, a whisper not in my ears but Tinsian seed, my skull, a language that wasn't formed of words, but of angles and shadows, a geometry of dread. It slithered around my thoughts, cold and wet, like a serpent uncoiling. The cat shuddered, a ripple passing through its patched-together fur. Then it began to unravel, not in a violent explosion, but in a slow, deliberate dissolution. The seams previously glowing with that unsettling ember light flared white, then faded, the stitches dissolving into nothing. The fur itself seemed to loosen, to forlift from the creature's form, drifting into the air like ash. It wasn't falling, though. It was being pulled. Each strand, each patch of mismatched fur, each tiny whisker, floated upward, drawn toward the mirror's fractured surface. The air thickened with it, a swirling cloud of white, the smell intensifying, becoming something almost sweet, like burnt sugar, but laced with the tang of iron. The cat's body, or what remained of it, contracted, shrinking inward, the white ash coalescing around a core of heat that shimmered and distorted the air. It wasn't a disintegration of flesh and bone, but a phantom presence, of something that had never truly been solid to begin with. It was like watching a photograph fade, the colors leaching away, leaving only the texture of the paper. I tasted ash, not the gritty residue of a fire, but a fine, powdery dust coating my tongue, clinging to the back of my throat. It wasn't just a taste, but a feeling temby, a dryness, a brittleness, as if my own insides were turning to powder. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted, clogged with the phantom dust. The heat intensified. It wasn't the oppressive, stifling heat from the vent anymore, but a focused, radiating warmth that seemed to emanate from the space where the cat had been. The floorboards beneath my feet vibrated, a low, resonant hum that traveled up my legs and into my spine. The wood didn't creak or groan. It hung on, a low, mournful melody that seemed to burrow into my bones. I forced my gaze to the mirror, and what I saw made me gasp, though no sound escaped my lips. The ash wasn't simply drifting toward the glass. It was being absorbed, sifted into the cracks and fissures, filling the jagged edges, smoothing over the broken shards. The mirror wasn't reflecting the room anymore. It was becoming awful, not in a physical sense. The glass remained fractured, but the gaps were closing, the reflections within shifting and swirling like liquid mercury. The white ash pulsed with the same heat as the cat, the light growing brighter, the reflections becoming less and less defined. The room, my cabin, was fading, replaced by something else, I find. A landscape of white, a blinding expanse of nothingness, broken only by the growing, swirling vortex within the mirror's frame. My hand, still clenched around the remaining stub of chalk, trembled violently. I wanted to look away, to bury my face in my hands, to block out the horrifying transformation. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before me. I was a witness, a captive audience to something ancient and terrible. The last of the ash drifted into the mirror's frame, and the vortex reached a fever pitch. The white light flared, then contracted, and for a moment the mirror went black, completely, utterly black. Then, a single point of light ignited within the darkness, a tiny spark that grew and expanded, blossoming into a swirling nebula of white. The mirror wasn't reflecting anymore. It was a twin window, and something was looking back. The blood was warm, not the searing heat of the cabin's walls, but the clean, bright sting of a fresh cut. I pressed the knife's edge against my palm, a shallow slice that bled steadily, the metallic tang sharp on my tongue. Not copper, not ash. Something older, like the river stone beneath the swamp water. The blood dripped onto the floorboards, each drop a tiny dark phantom plink echoing in the unnatural quiet. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the sound of the sound tile leaving. The way the air felt thickened, viscous, like trying to breathe through wet gauze. I dipped the knife's tip into the crimson pool, then began to draw. Not the chalk's brittle lines, but the blood's slow, deliberate flow tracing the final door into the canvas of the air. The door wasn't drawn on the wall. It was sifted from the blood itself. A dark, wet outline that seemed to absorb the yellow smog, the very light around it dimming to a deep, wet black. The door swung open without a sound. Not a creak, not a sigh. It simply piwasu there, a void where the cabin's single window should be, revealing nothing but the crushing, perfect emptiness of the outside world. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a physical thing, pressing against my eardrums like the weight of 1,000 folded maps. It was the sound of dust settling in a tomb, the dry scrape of parchment tearing in a sealed room. I could feel it in my teeth, a low thrumming vibration that traveled up my arm as I lifted my foot to step through the doorway. I stepped forward, the floorboards beneath my worn boots vibrating with the same low hum as the mirror behind me. The air shifted, thinning, as if the cabin itself was exhaling. I didn't look back, couldn't. The mirror was there, reflecting the empty cabin. The yellow smog vanished, the room stripped bare. But in the glass, my reflection stood where I had been, its hand reaching out, its foot lifting to step through the very door I had just crossed. It wasn't mimicking me. It was Siva replacing I. The reflection's movement was precise, unhurried, as if the glass had always been a window, not a barrier. The cabin's empty space stretched behind me, the air now smelling of damp earth and something faintly sweet, like crushed mint left in the rain. The reflection's foot crossed the threshold of the mirror. Not the glass, the 4D frame of the glass, the very edge where the reflection met the real world. I felt the cabin shift, the wood groaning with a sound like a sighing bone. My reflection stepped out of the mirror, its hand now reaching toward the empty space where I had just stood. The mirror didn't show the cabin anymore. It showed the reflection stepping out of the glass, the room behind it empty, the yellow smog gone, the silence absolute. The reflection's eyes met mine in the glass, and for a single, frozen moment, I saw the exact moment it stepped forward, the mirror's glass rippling like water. Then it was gone, and the mirror showed only the empty cabin. The door I had stepped through now closed, the blood stain on the floorboards fading to a dry, pale stain. The silence was complete, thick as wet parchment, and the reflection was gone. The door was closed, the mirror was empty, and I was standing where the reflection had been, the silence pressing in, heavy and final.